I remember turning up at one of the islands in the Torres Strait on the plane at about 6 o'clock in the evening, and there was nowhere to operate, and so they shoved me in an old community hall, and it was dark, and the people were already waiting there with their dogs, waiting to be spayed. There was no one to help me. The person who was supposed to help me had vanished ahead of us, going down the dirt road, and who do I see staggering slowly down the road ahead of the car on his own, but the dog that nearly died the night before, that I spent all night giving TLC to, keeping going. It was a bit shocking at that age to realise that all the authorities were right in on all the corruption. It was a big wake-up call to me. The thought went through my head as it was happening. There was just enough time to think, oh, this is how you died, it's that easy. It was an underwater shark encounter. Really, it's not so hard once you start looking to find a way into the wildlife world and find a connection with people who help to keep you inspired and on that path.
Welcome to Working with Wildlife, where I, your host, Jaden Lunt, speak to experts and enthusiasts in different fields of nature to find out how and why they do what they do. I don't know about you, but flying around the countryside as a vet fixing animals sounds like a pretty wild adventure. Well, today's guest has done just that, with over 2 decades worth of experience running her own veterinary practice called Mobile Vet Services Cairns, which is based in the township of Cairns, which is in the northern parts of Queensland, Australia. Additionally, she has authored the novel Black Ivory, which follows the plight of African elephants and a heroine who faces personal, existential, and other challenges throughout the book. Though today's guest primarily works as a domestics vet, she also has a great passion for wildlife. Growing up in Kenya, particularly, she has a passion for African wildlife. So without further ado, let's hear more about her story. Please welcome to the show author and business owner, Dr. Jo Squire.
Before we jump into your experience as a vet and an author as well, and what your processing was around that, I was just wondering if you could give a bit of an info on where you're coming from today.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on. Very much appreciated, and it's lovely to talk to you. So, I'm very interested in inspiring people to go down the path of working with wildlife.
Mm.
But for their own good as well as for the good of the wildlife.
Of the wildlife, yeah.
I think it's being said a lot now. Finally, people are realizing half of the trouble with mankind is we are so disconnected from where we came, from nature, from the planet. A lot of people think we're something completely different from the animals and the nature around us.
Mm.
And I think going down that path of getting reconnected to the wilderness and wildlife is massively helpful. It's not just about saving the animals, it's about saving ourselves, and sometimes personally about giving your own life meaning and structure and positivity, which can be hard to find in the modern world.
Mm. And that's an interesting thought straight away. But you're coming from North Queensland. You're in Cairns, correct?
I'm in Cairns. Sorry, I went off on a tangent there.
No, that's totally fine.
So Cairns, I have been here for quite a long time, most of my working career. I particularly like it because it does get me back to nature. We're in the tropics. We're surrounded by rainforest. We've got the reef. So I'm not forgetting about the underworld, wildlife, water world, in which I'm also very interested. I did actually move up here largely because of the diving as well as the rainforest.
So you're into diving?
Yes. Yeah, I've been diving for a long time.
Wow.
A lot of stuff under there needs help too.
Mm. I mean, I love the underwater world, so I have a little idea maybe of why you moved, just for a big reason being you're saying is that you moved for the ocean and the underwater world up in Cairns. That's a very committed reason. It's a very committed reason. So you're saying, well, I guess have you always been interested in the underwater world uh,
I
since you were
I'm
younger?
one of those I'm one of those people who grew up in the days of Jack Cousteau, I hate to own up, and I was always transfixed. I sometimes look at his earlier work now, which did a little bit of ocean plundering and shudder and horror, but he did inspire a whole generation to what was going on under the water, rather than it just being that big savage sea out there. It was like, oh my God, look what is under there. And his son was big in the wildlife conservation world. So that did start me off diving. As soon as I was able to learn to dive, I did. Yeah.
Wow. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that a little bit later in the conversation as well, Joe. Because I mean, the whole idea of inspiring is something also that you're trying to do as well. So someone has inspired you, and you're looking to inspire others now. And you're also, Joe, you've got a fair bit of experience. You've been running a wildlife practice, a veterinary practice for the past 15-ish years,
Or
if I can recall. Yeah,
a
correctly.
little bit longer than that.
A little bit
Yes.
longer. So it's a mobile veterinary service. Could you give us a definition of what this service entails, what you do, and then we can go into why you thought that this was what you should give of your time for too.
Uh, I I didn't want to be in an office just sort of churning the people through doing consults. I wanted a little bit more sort of interaction with people and not to be confined to an office. So I started off the mobile actually doing house calls around Cairns and, the odd injured animal, wildlife sort of injured animal.
Mm,
And because I was mobile and I advertised as mobile, I started to get phone calls from the Torres Strait and from Cape York, where there's communities. Now, this is very much cats and dogs work in the
mm.
communities, but oh, you're mobile. Do you think you could fly up to our community and help us with the animals here? So it sort of ballooned out into that a little bit, to doing trips up the
Mm.
Cape and trips into the Torres Strait. Quite accidentally, to be quite honest. But once I'd done the first job, I thought, this is really good fun and it's adventurous. And I always was adventurous. So it just did its own thing, really, without me plotting and planning too much.
It just did its own thing. That's pretty cool. Do you do
Yeah.
you, so? What was that first call like if you can remember, like the first call you got that kind of opened up this pathway for you? What was that like?
Well, your first reaction, because I'm actually very introverted, is, oh, I don't think I can do that. And then you have to think through that to think, well, why can't I do that? Why am I less able to do that than any other vet that's been phoned up to do this job?
Mm,
Although a lot of vets don't like being outside their comfort zone in terms of, flying off with a whole clinic inside a couple of big containers. So it was a little bit confronting. You do the first job, and I suppose in some ways I can be a bit impulsive. I got myself in a situation. I'm in a remote community, and now they're expecting me to spay dogs. How do I do this? And you just have to sometimes do it a step at a time and make it up. And you're not exactly winging it. You're not being inconsiderate to the people and animals around you, but
mm.
you are really, really having to work at, okay, nobody's told me how to do this. How am I going to go forward from here? So it's
Yeah.
quite a learning process. It's quite a good growth process to be forced outside your comfort zones into a situation where you are just having to work through it on your own,
Calibrated
not be told
testing.
what to do. Yes.
I love calibrated testing.
Yes.
What was did it? did you? So you felt that you were a bit of outside of your comfort zone in these
Definitely.
communities. You're away from everyone. Can I ask,
Um,
how did you facilitate these trips? So you've got you've got a veterinary practice. How many years in were you before this opportunity made itself known? And then what processes did you have to work through to be able to facilitate bringing all this gear to a remote community?
so I had only just started the mobile practice. I'd probably only been doing it a year or two when somebody said, "Are you prepared to try and do this?" Luckily for me, the contact came from a vet nurse I knew who was working in the community, not as a vet nurse up there, obviously. And
Mm,
she said, "Hey, we really need help with the dogs up here. Are you prepared to come and do it? Are you prepared to be paid this much?" Which was a pittance. And I was, "Oh, that sounds interesting." So I agreed without doing too much thinking. And it was probably a good thing because too much thinking sometimes stops you actually from going forward
mm,
on a path. You start to think of all the reasons why it can't work, why it's too hard. So having got committed, I just had to do all the, how am I going to get my surgical kits ready? How am I going to pack down small? And off you go and you do your best, and it
yeah.
generally works out.
Okay.
Yeah.
And to get the equipment there, so it's worked out. You committed to the process. To get the equipment there, did you have to find the equipment yourself? How did you
Um,
transfer? You sent a couple containers. Did you go down to your local vet superstore and be
no,
like, "Hey, I need this, this, and this from from the shelves. Please put in a container and send it to Whoop Whoop." Like, how did that work?
it oh, look, there are veterinary websites where you can buy surgical kits and all the stuff you need, and I actually, so with the house call mobile vet business, a friend of mine who actually owned a clinic allowed me to use her clinic to do surgery. So I'd provided my own kits that they would cook up for me in between my visits there. So I actually had already done a bit of that process. I had the gear, I had the surgery kits.
Mm,
So that bit had half been thought through accidentally just for my mobile vet practice around Cairns.
okay. And so it was just about packing
Mm,
what you had up and then shipping it
yeah,
off. Mm,
yeah,
mm,
yeah. And the hard thing in the communities is when you work in a practice or are using someone else's practice, there's an anaesthetic machine and there's a surgical nurse. So I was sort of basically heading off into the wilderness. I did have the nurse on that first job, though I did many jobs subsequent where I didn't, but no anaesthetic machine. So I had to go back to the basics, how they used to do anaesthetics in the old days, where you put the pentothal into the vein, you tie the needle in the vein, and off you go. You try and get the animal stabilized before you start, but you have to be very tuned in too. And you have to really be noticing, is the animal breathing a bit faster? Do I need to stop the surgery? Top up with more meds IV. You can't do with a machine, you can get them stabilized and the machine just
pretty
keeps
quickly.
delivering the anesthetic. Where, yeah, this was, it's wearing off all the time. So you'd
Mm,
have to stop, give them a little bit of a top up, not when I had the nurse, but after that, and then do a bit of a scrub up again and then go back. So it was quite stressful, actually. And it was actually the reason why I finally slowed down doing the remote work.
right. So
It,
you've got to kind of have like a seventh sense, which is the combination of all your senses put into one, to be able to monitor that yourself. Okay.
basically, yeah, yeah. It was quite a learning curve. And again, had I thought too hard about it, I'd have never done it. But
Said no,
you
yeah.
do a few and you do a few and you realise, yeah, I'm capable of doing this.
Mm,
And I think a
it's a
lot
bit
of
of,
introverted people get held up by all the stuff that can go wrong.
mm. So
Yeah.
yeah, a bit of belief in self is pretty necessary. Could I ask, Joe, with where you kind of started, like your first fly-in job? and the little bit of information you knew then. You've been doing that, business for a couple of years by then, maybe 2 years. You've been doing this for over 15 years now. So that's a large period of time to have to be able to hone in your skills and practice of how you go about doing that. What is the antithesis of where you were then to where you are now in regards to the processes that you've kind of honed in and sharpened? What are some of those processes now?
Oh, I've probably had, a few emergencies and worked through them, and you realise you can work through them. Dogs bleeding under anaesthetic. I mean, that's not just a remote clinic problem. That's a problem generally, the things that can go wrong. And you can basically deal with the situation, and you also realise you're the one that's going to have to do it. Don't panic. Just stay calm and keep working on what you've got to fix.
So stay calm and keep working.
Stay calm.
In this period of time, as in this business, what has been like something you wish you knew sooner? Someone started, what's something you wish you knew sooner?
Probably to ask for help. Probably to, in terms of other people, ask for more help and, speak my mind in terms of what I'm worried about, because people generally do want to help. And if you say, I'm worried about this, what about this? This is not acceptable. I can't do it this way. You're less likely to get into a situation that's hard to fix. I remember turning up at one of the islands in the Torres Strait on the plane at about 6 o'clock in the evening, and there was nowhere to operate, and so they shoved me in an old community hall, and it was dark, and the people were already waiting there with their dogs, waiting to be spayed. There was no one to help me. The person who was supposed to help me had vanished, as often happens in that situation. Maybe they're scared too.
Right.
So setting it up in poor lighting and basically struggling through doing surgery to about midnight, and then having a dog bleeding on me, which is incredibly stressful. You fix up the mess, you survive the dog. I kept the dog. I took it into the little donga where they put me for the night and made sure that it was fine. The bloke came to pick it up in the morning, and I said, look, this dog only just survived the surgery. Please be really careful. So the same morning, my job for the next day is driving around catching dogs to give them birth control shots and parasite shots and penicillin shots, really basic medicine. And we're heading down the hill off this Torres Strait Island with a beautiful view of the sea ahead of us, going down this dirt road. And who do I see staggering slowly down the road ahead of the car on his own, but the dog that nearly died the night before, that I've spent all night giving TLC to, keeping going. I've sent home with strict instructions, and there it is heading off to the ocean for a swim on its own about 2 hours later.
Wow.
So I think these days I probably would insist on more help and a better setup and some, more backup than then, when I tended to, I can do all this on my own. And then someone suffers the consequence. Yeah.
And why do you think people often struggle with asking for help?
I don't know. Maybe I'm a worse case than normal. I think people just don't like to, expose their insecurity, maybe, or look like they're incapable. They're trying to put on a bit of a front that, I can deal with this. I can get through it. Yeah. I think asking for help is really important, because on average, other people are very willing to help. and quite keen to help. And you often don't realise that when you're younger, how keen people are to, rush in and assist as they can.
Mm.
Yeah.
Joe, I'd like to, in a moment, get to opening up the story of how you started writing and why you started writing, but a little bit more on with your veterinary practice. You said that you started it because you didn't want to be just in an office all the time. Pretty much is what I'm hearing. For someone that might want to start their own veterinary practice, I would think it's a big deal. What study have you done to be able to do this for both business? What research have you done on business, and kind of culminate all that? And then what would you say to someone who's trying to do kind of what you're doing in this, and what tips would you give?
So just getting through vet school, anyone who's applied is actually quite a major event, applying, actually being accepted and getting through vet school. Once you're through, you're technically qualified to go and set up on your own. And a few brave, extroverted souls do and make more mistakes, but learn a whole lot faster than the people who are a bit frightened of it. But that tends to be how it pans out. So my friends from vet school, the ones who are very confident, just went out and started up their own practices and off they went, where it's a lot better to get a bit of guidance. So the early days, I did work in clinics for my first few years and didn't particularly enjoy doing it. I was always a really hard worker, and it just became a thing where, you were pushed to try and see everyone in the day. I enjoyed working with the animals, actually enjoyed the clients generally, because you tend to be seeing people who do care about animals. Even if it's not wildlife, you do tend to be seeing a different sort of person when you're seeing the pet owners coming in. They're people who are caring for something else apart from just themselves and their own clan.
Yes.
Now, in terms of business, I actually had no business training. That is where you need to ask for help, and I didn't. So that was a very slow process. I wasn't particularly driven by money. Obviously, I knew I had to earn a living, but it wasn't a main motivator back then.
What was the main motivator?
Good Lord. I really like fixing things. I like working with the animals and making them better. It's very rewarding. It's great getting the phone calls saying, "Oh, so and so much better today. Thank you for your help. That was really great." It's actually quite a rewarding career when you're not under too much pressure, because you get that feedback. And of course, when you're doing it for yourself, you get a lot more of the feedback because people are completely engaging with you, rather than a clinic where you're just sort of,
maybe.
yeah. But I think if you're setting up a business, don't think you can wing it or just learn it all off the internet. Do try and get a little bit of help at the start.
Can I ask, Joe, where did you get help from? If you did, like you said, you didn't. It took longer, and the process took longer. Did you eventually ask for support? And if so, where did you go?
In terms of the business side of things, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Funnily enough, I'd had a couple of accountants, and a lady who was an accountant that I was handed over to by an accountancy practice just looked at me and said, "Joe, would you like me to help you?" I'd started treating her animals, so I think she had learned who I was and seen how I was doing things. And she basically said, "Joe, would you like me to help you?" And I gave her a big smile and a nod. And she probably started me off on a better path than my first few years of, sure, I was making an income, but I was muddling along and pretty disorganized in that department.
Okay, so the accountancy and help
Yeah.
in your accountancy area space was really beneficial to the business.
And I think, yeah, having someone sympathetic too,
Mm,
just sort of looking at me, because I'd had a couple of accountants beforehand, like, yeah, we'll just do the books, whatever happens, long as we're getting paid. And, then I hit
mm.
on someone who wasn't
Actually
like that.
care
And
as well.
it's luck sometimes when you meet the right person who says, "Oh my God, this girl is, not doing this half as well as she could be.
Mm,
I'll ask her if she wants some help." So I'm always so grateful to people like that, and I really try and do that. With my clients, give them more than just the basics. Think
mm.
about extra things
Really
I
bring
can tell.
value.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
Well, it sounds like things are going a lot better now than when they first started out.
yes.
I think if there was one piece of business advice, I'd like to get to hear about your own the story of the story that you've created, that you've authored. But what is one piece of business advice that you wish you knew before you started?
Well, I did know not to be completely driven by money, because I think if you're working in a caring profession, people pick that up pretty quickly. So I did know that part of it. And I think that's really, really important. Don't let the dollar guide you. When you get the dollars, you know, run the backstory of how you're running your business properly, but don't be motivated by, oh God, I'm not going to do this. This is just too hard. I can't earn good money. And when I set off doing that remote job, it was terrible money, but it was, this is really interesting. This is different.
Mm,
Yeah. Yeah. Don't let business run you too much. That's just me and my
mm.
motivation. It really is.
But you
Let
see, that's very
what
important.
let what run you is, one, being really satisfied with what you're doing, and two is doing something to help a greater purpose than you.
Mm,
It seems like, oh God, terrible. I really want to help myself, but actually, the path, I think, to feeling happy about the world at large is to look at what's going on around you and be really grateful for what you've got, and look at, how can I help? How can I help? Yeah.
be grateful and find a need and see if you are able to fulfill that need. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
Or,
definitely. Find a path that's fulfilling, because you're then going to be happier putting in all those extra hours than
mm,
if you're putting them in, "Oh my God, I'm doing all this for nothing. This is such hard work. I'm on the computer all evening. I'm not getting paid for this." You've got to, like, be really motivated, like, this is really making a difference, getting me where I want to be, making change. You end up feeling better about yourself and this planet that we're all delivered onto.
yeah, awesome. Awesome. I'm seeing also that you've got an elephant just behind you. The book that you authored, Black Ivory, is the book
Yeah.
that you've authored, Joe. Uh, what is this book about, and why did you write it? It's a big thing, I
I've
would
all
think, to spend a lot of hours writing and authoring, and then
it
publishing a book.
it's definitely more profitable being a vet, even when you're working at low function being a vet, um, or low business function. So I think that's just my introverted nature. I've always liked writing. Whenever I've been working in remote communities, I've written little stories, always been writing stories about everything, really. And I finally decided I wanted to, start writing properly. Went to a writing workshop, and they basically say, just write whatever comes into your head. And you write a few pages of rubbish. And then I wrote the first chapter of this book. It just came out of me about the girl and the elephant, and which was quite interesting. It was absolutely not in my mind, I have to write a book about about this particular thing. I'd written lots of little stories about wildlife, but I'd never thought about anything bigger than that. So, yeah, the first chapter came out about the girl living out on a park in Africa, bumping into, a big elephant coming the other way. And basically the book evolved from there. And I realized I had so much backstory to tell from growing up in Africa. We had neighbors with an orphaned baby elephant, an orphaned cheetah. We had a serval that wasn't orphaned, but she was in bad conditions that we rescued. So I suddenly realized just incorporating that into a general story about Africa and saving wildlife, there was a lot to tell from first-hand experience.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that a part of this book, at least, is due to your experiences back in Africa.
Yes.
That you're able to draw from. You said also that African wildlife is a big passion of yours. It's not something that you work with at the moment, but you did volunteer, I believe, at a wildlife rehabilitation park.
I volunteered with a volunteer organisation in South Africa at 2 different parks. One was a park with a lot of the last big tuskers, that it was a lot harder to find the wildlife in there to do all the things.
And a big tusker, I just want to jump on that. A big tusker is an older elephant, an older male elephant. Or female elephant.
Yeah, it's generally the big old males that have the huge tusks, and their numbers are very low, and they're still very hunt out by trophy hunters, which unfortunately is still a big thing in the world.
Hunting. And why is a big tusker so important?
Because elephants, it's not a story that they do have long memories. The older elephants have a lot of past history of migration paths, herd, how the herd works, and a lot of, the older males and female elephants are really, really important for elephant survival in the world and teaching the younger ones. So taking out the big ones doesn't just mean that more young ones are going to grow up and eventually have big tusks. There's a huge family social structure in the elephant world. People tend to think of them as giant cows wandering around the wilderness, but they're actually very social, intelligent animals. They say they're as smart as chimps and dolphins when they've done the research on brains and behavior.
Right. And elephants, you said you've got a passion for all African wildlife. And that's because, can I ask, you grew up in South Africa, but were you born in South Africa?
No, I was born in England, and then it was Kenya. So my second book is set in South Africa, but the first one is in Kenya, where basically my dad went out to teach at a tiny little school in the middle of nowhere in Africa, a little place called Njoro, near Lake Nakuru, which is one of the big flamingo lakes. So,
and when did you move over there from England?
When I was about 7 years old, and I was there till I was about 16.
Okay, so a fair while, and that's a lot. So this time, this 7 to 16. So that's 7 to 16. That's about 9 years. About 9 years. About 9 years.
Yeah.
That time in Africa really is where you draw a lot of your passion from for this book. If that's what you're saying, it sounds like.
Oh, definitely. I was always a bit fascinated by Africa. I remember when I was, a teenager, actually at boarding school in England. So think about it, I was living in Africa then. I read a book by Jane Goodall called In the Shadow of Man about the chimps, and she's massive in the wildlife movement these days. It has a huge foundation. And I remember the first chapter of that really affecting me, and then seeing it firsthand around me, seeing the elephants being poached, discovering that the big poachers in those days were all tied in with the government.
Right.
It was a bit shocking at that age to realise that all the authorities were right in on all the corruption. It was a big wake-up call to me as to how
Right.
hard it
Was
was
that a
going to
known
be.
thing, or is that it took digging
It
to
was
get to that point, or was that a known fact?
No, it was commonly known back in those days. Kenya is not like that anymore. Kenya has a pretty good record these days, while South Africa is probably more like that these days. But yeah, it was commonly known, and everybody was too frightened to do anything. And it was back in the days before social media and getting messages out and getting an eye on what was going on.
Yeah,
You know,
and getting that
hardly,
crowdsourcing and for protection.
yeah,
Yeah, it wasn't.
there was no way to do anything like that then. Yeah.
Mm. For
So
writing a book, it kind of started off at a workshop, an author's workshop. It started there,
yeah,
but it's grown
yeah,
into a novel series. You've got one out now. The second one's going to come out in about 6 months and then before we started recording, you said there's going to be a third one. So,
yeah.
what's that process? What are these three books about? And what are they about? And why do you think it is something that you want to give of your time and life to?
Basically, to sure the story is being got out there. You can YouTube it, see what's going on. But the first one was really about the making of a wildlife warrior. So there's a fair bit of story in there about the girl's own process as she's trying to save these elephants that she's studying. The second one, I thought that's actually quite interesting, bringing in the psychological aspect of why people do what they do, why they do help, why they don't help. So I brought in a whole lot of other characters in the second story and a very different sort of poacher in my second story. First one, I sort of just had the poacher as an out and out, bad guy, which that particular one was. The second one, I brought in much more of, Asian warlords going into Africa, inciting the young African men into going into the park to poach, and how there's an endless stream of that going on. So the second book was set in South Africa along the Mozambique border, and there's a big problem there of the really poverty-stricken Mozambicans coming across, raiding the parks very, very badly.
Right.
The third, and I thought when I finished writing that, right, that's everything I know that I can communicate usefully. And then I did the volunteering trip, and there was so much of interest about how now these days people are working with a very downscaled wildlife population, I hate to say, that I thought I can write a whole story about what happens that's still entertaining, but shows people what it might be like to be part of that whole big picture. So my third one's, I've just started writing a few chapters around that, is very much about the wildlife volunteers. It's still a sequel to the first two, but it's tying in volunteers coming in and what happens. We did some really interesting things. One of the things we did was we sort of had to bait, just with meat, hyenas in to dart them at night. And it was the most interesting experience doing this hyena darting, sitting in the cars at night, them coming in, and all you could see was their eyes in the lights coming round and the odd little cackle. And finally, the daughter of the matriarch was the only one brave enough to come in and eat off the bait at first. And then the larger male came in, and because she's the daughter of the matriarch, she chased him off her bait. And then finally, when we'd managed to dart a hyena and it was down, we'd been out there so long and the bait had been out there so long, lions appeared. So we're standing on top of the truck, shining lights out. And one of the jobs as a volunteer was we're on the back of the truck, shining lights to spot the lions, to keep the people on the ground taking the blood samples, safe to alert them if the lions were going to get any closer. So that was a particularly good story, but there are a lot of little stories like that about what happened, and I thought, oh, this is just such good writing material. I can make a really good story.
Not do something with it.
Yeah, I can't not do something with it. Yeah.
So it's fictional. It's a fictional novel, but based in reality.
It is
reality based.
completely. Yeah, there's the first one. Probably 50% of the chapters are things that really happened, tied into the whole over story. The second one, nothing that happened directly to me, but with a lot of research about what was going on in South Africa around the Mozambique border. And I'm in contact with some organisations that I send money off to, particularly one called Fauna Flora. And they're at the moment working in a park sort of in Mozambique, in that area, trying to, protect at least a proportion of the wildlife of a much larger Mozambique park. So I've been in contact with them and learned a fair bit about what happens there. And I've had a lot of stories to tell about just the individual people and how their own psychology tied into the wildlife. And I wanted to put that in the second book, but that is completely fictional. The third book will be mostly centered around fictional characters, but having similar experiences to what the volunteers were having. And just look at what's going on in the modern world. We've only got 4,000 cheetah left in the wild, 4,000 African hunting dogs left. Just what exactly is going on, taking genetic samples, protecting populations, relocating them to other places in Africa, protecting them there. So a lot of the species that have been really hammered, they are trying to get the numbers back up. And there's a huge amount of volunteer work in that area if you're interested in going. And it's amazing. It's much better than being tourist.
Okay, so two things then. Well, what is how will someone, how would someone volunteer? What's the process? Monetarily, transport, experience over there, getting back, the kind of those details in a quick little summary. And then, so what? Just the first book is about the plight of the African elephant, as they're a bit of a flagship species. And then your second book is about volunteering. And then or is that your third book?
That's the third book. Yeah,
sorry,
the second is. Yeah, the second is. It's really about the picture in South Africa, where the first was the picture in Kenya.
With the psychology of the human being and why people do what they do, sort of thing.
Yeah, basically, yeah. We're all very much more tied into this wild world than we really understand, I think. Yeah.
But
so
why do you think we are so tied in and we don't understand?
Well, I think our thinking minds, which are, have made us what we are, has also somehow made us think that we're different. And actually, we're all run very much by instant reactions and emotions. We make a lot of bad decisions without even realizing it. Because emotions get involved and wrong thought process get involved, and we've just got the wrong information and we emotionally react to it in a certain way, and we, go down a path that maybe doesn't suit us. Yeah, I think a lot of people don't seem to understand, we are animals ourselves with very complex emotions that are running us in the background of what we think are our rational minds. And our minds are often not that rational. A computer's mind's probably more rational than the way we make decisions. To be quite honest, a lot of the time.
No, it's true. Computers generally are more rational, but they I think rational is maybe even it kind of looks like it might even be the wrong word, because to be rational or irrational, the need requires emotion. Because when you're rational, that means you have the ability to control your emotion, and then to be irrational is the inability to control one's emotion. Do you think that is true?
I think a lot of people don't quite realise how much their decisions are underlined by less obvious emotions. You know, you think you've got your head around this, but you're still making decisions a little bit affected that aren't the smartest decisions. I don't think we're quite as smart as we think we are. I mean, look at what's going on in the world at large now, and the way the decisions that are being made by the people that we vote in. There's a lot of very irrational stuff going on in our man-made world at the moment, in terms of ourselves, not just the amazing planet that we've been plundering for so long and can't continue to do because we're under threat now. Yeah, I don't think we're half as with it as we think, our human species.
Right. You said also that that people don't realize that we're animals. Why do you think that is important to understand? And what do you think having that belief that we are animals, how does that impact our behavior then?
Well, we are part of the natural world, and we have this idea that we can completely control it, and we've spoilt the soil, we'll just make fertilizers and herbicides and pesticides. We're not able to view nature as part of ourselves and the natural world as part of ourselves and treat it like it's part of ourselves. We do tend to continue to think we can just keep on digging it up and cutting it down and destroying it unless it's of direct benefit to us. And the rude shock is already coming. Our insects are really down at the moment, and you think, oh, well, they're just insects. But, that feeds the whole ecosystem. And it's the same underwater. We trawl everything out of the oceans and everything above it dies. We kill the sharks and, that doesn't control things. Yeah, we're just doing so much damage because we look at the planet as a resource rather than as part of ourselves. And quite obviously, we can't control things. We're trying to, and we're not working at it. We're not getting there. We're just getting ourselves more and more backed into a corner at the moment.
Can I ask, as well, Joe, you say that people don't realize that the planet is somewhat part of ourselves. What do you mean by that?
So everything that goes into us has come from the earth through some other species. We're made up of the same stuff as the rest of the planet. We have the same emotional world as animals have emotions. Animals feel jealousy and guarding of resources and, all the scary things that we've got just so aggressive about. That's directly come from the animal world. Our good instincts, looking after our families, looking after ourselves, that's come from the animal world. It's really about looking after your own kind, isn't it, to a certain extent? The trouble is we're so good at it while thinking that our species is the most important thing on the planet. And to a certain extent, obviously, to us it is. But if we're doing it at the expense of everything else, we're heading for a rude awakening. I think we're already pretty close to a rude awakening.
So it sounds like you believe that the evidence of emotion is what depicts the value of or is evidence of the connection or what is required for that oneness that you're kind of explaining.
Yeah, we're driven by the same things, really, as animals are. I mean, we're really driven by our needs and our emotions, which are often centered around our needs, let's face it. And that has come directly from the animal world, of which we are part. So we are as much part of this planet as any other animal on the planet. And luckily for us, we have our smart brain that's allowed us to do some incredible stuff and enjoy some amazing things. But to some extent, that's been our downfall at all. And it's also what's disconnected us from where we've come from and makes us less able to see that, and less willing to do anything about it.
Right.
I'm not talking, when I say us, I'm not talking about, the people who are part of that, but I think a lot of the human population is particularly living in a giant city, often with no choice. There is very little connection with nature for a lot of the world's population.
So you're saying connection is important, at least having some sort of touch some grass kind of idea, at least touch grass, right?
Yeah,
that is an important thing. With this idea for yourself, this seems to be a very foundational belief of yours, that emotion and that connectivity with nature. Has this always been a foundational view of yours since you were very young? I guess really more so. I'd like to kind of hear about a little bit of your younger years and what that was like, and maybe some of those formative moments and fork in the road kind of parts of your life. All those kinds of things that I'd like to discuss. But has this always been a foundational belief?
I think so. I mean, I actually was lucky in some ways, unlucky in other ways, to grow up with parents who were very interested in wildlife and the wilderness. And, my dad was a very keen bird watcher in the day before twitching became a thing.
Original twitcher.
As a child, I wasn't really a twitcher, funnily enough. I mean, in Kenya, we did a bit of twitching. There were just so many bird species. I think there's over 1,000, or there was over 1,000 different bird species. So, and a lot of them were very spectacular, just like a lot of the Australian birds are actually very spectacular. Coming from England, there weren't that many spectacular birds. So it was quite an experience to get to Africa and be surrounded by all the wilderness and the wildlife, which you saw a bit in England. But my parents also liked to travel a lot. So as kids, we spent a lot of time camped out in the wilderness. My dad was fairly antisocial, didn't want to, be in caravan parks, didn't want to be around other people. So we were always camped in the middle of nowhere on our own. So a bit of it was forced on me.
Middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Camping is a lot more glamorous these days. So what was that camping experience like?
In the places in Africa where we were camped, it was often our water was in big jerry cans, and we were down on the ground, and a fair bit of it was in the earlier days. My dad would go off having wildlife encounters all on his own very early in the morning. But generally the rest of it, we would be in a safer environment in the car, driving around.
I was wondering, isn't there an issue of lions, hyenas, oh my, sort of thing?
Yeah. There was, and I think about, some of the risks that we took, and you just think, how lucky am I that the universe delivered nicely to me. Yeah.
Was there some hairy moments that you ever experienced whilst in Africa between those 9 years?
One of them was being camped out actually in the middle of a national park, but it wasn't the campgrounds these days, they do cordon the edges off better and sort of make a bit of protection against wildlife. But there was this camp you could go out to, which was supposed to have a fence around it. It's in Zimbabwe. You could go and spend the night out there. Just you could pick the campsite and have it all to yourself. So off we went, and we got there, and funnily enough, there was this one tiny little open toilet block with one toilet and nothing else, and fences down, which didn't faze my parents in the slightest. Nothing ever fazed them. It was like, oh, don't be so silly. The animals aren't going to eat us, Very British. That's ridiculous. So we're camped out in the tents at night, in a couple of tents, with the one car. And in the early hours of the morning, the lions just started roaring really close to us. And then the next thing, there were hooves galloping around. And obviously the lions were on a hunt, like right next to open camp. It was quite alarming, only because you realise how completely vulnerable you are. And it was a bit of a run for the car. My first instinct as I sat up in the tent was, I'm getting in the car. And I just wasn't brave enough to leave the tent and do the dash for the car. So we listened to this whole lion hunt going on around us, with roaring and hooves going. You finally heard it was a wildebeest. We finally heard the wildebeest going down, and then there was more roaring. I didn't realise so much roaring went on in lion hunts, or I don't know why these guys were doing it, but it was utterly terrifying. So in the morning, packed up and drove out, and the kill was about 100 metres away from us. So that was a pretty good wildlife encounter.
Yeah.
I've had other wilderness encounters, not in Africa, with bears and things since then, where I've been without a car, without a tree to climb up, and a bear. I like to hike as well, and a bear harassing us at camp. And I do appreciate how hard it is for people who actually live on the edge of these wildernesses with the wildlife, how very scary it is. It is easy for us to drive around in the car, that you can get away quickly, and a different thing when you're actually on the ground with no protection and these big, frightening wild animals are close. You get a real feel for what it must have been like as as the first man out on the African Savanna.
Pretty wild stuff. Do you think, or if not, do you think, what has been probably the most terrifying wildlife encounter you have had, or most interesting?
The one, I think, where I should have been terrified, but there wasn't enough time.
There wasn't enough time to be terrified. Okay.
Yeah, the thought went through my head as it was happening. There was just enough time to think, oh, this is how you die, it's that easy. It was an underwater shark encounter, which is completely left field from the whole African thing. But it was diving near seals in a fjord in New Zealand. And the person I was diving with, he should have known better, but his reaction was, oh my God, this is a scary shark. It was a big shark, but it wasn't super scary. Well, it was scary. What it did was scary. It came past us, a very short distance away, and had a look at us, and it was crystal clear water, and it went off ahead, which is fine. I've seen a lot of sharks underwater, so I'm not particularly fazed. So, a shark swimming by isn't the end of the world, even if it's close. But it then did this huge loop out into this crystal clear water, and then just zoomed straight towards us. And it would have been, I could have touched it when it turned. And it did it so fast, we saw it doing the loop, and you're thinking, good, it's going away, and then it just turned and came straight at us fast. And so it was terrifying, but it was more seriously, there wasn't even time for terror to set in. There was just this flash thought, it's all over, this is how you die. And it came to within that arm's length and turned. And fortunately, we were quite close to the seals and we crawled out of the water on a rock. And by this stage, funnily enough, back then I was laughing my head off, crawling out into safety. I was really laughing my head off because as we crawled out of the water, which is hard work with all your dive gear on, we're surrounded on this giant rock by seals who normally would have just dived straight in the water at the sight that was presented to them, two people crawling out, me laughing my head off at probably a little bit, post-anxiety reaction, but also just the sight of the seals around us. And the seals were staying put. They weren't going in the water. Obviously, the shark was far more of an issue than the seals coming out.
So it was just yourself and the guide?
Myself and actually the skipper off a boat where I was doing a bit of a eco tour in the Sound. We got on a bit of an eco tour. And he said, if anyone knows how to dive, I'll take them down for a dive. So he and I,
That's
went
cool.
down and did this.
There's a team of two.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like a group. It was coming at you, this shark. It was
It
coming
was
at you.
just us two.
Do you know what species it was?
It wasn't a particularly bad one. It was a thresher shark. And I've since dived with them up in the Philippines. It was more the actions of the shark. They're quite big sharks. They're quite big, long sharks with a lovely tailing off bit on the tail. Very attractive looking sharks. And I feel that it was looking for a seal to eat. It came past us. Oh, are they seals? And did a bit of a loop. Yeah, maybe they are. Came back round, got that close to us. And then, maybe we were blowing a lot of bubbles by then too, which underwater animals don't like. So it's possible that, as it came towards us, we're puffing and blowing bubbles and it was enough to put it off having a test bite of us or whoever it was going to bite. Yeah. So it was potentially a very dangerous situation. And again, we got this very interesting experience and got off scot-free and had a good story to tell at the end of it.
A brilliant story, Joe. A brilliant story. I guess talking about stories as well, and for those from Joe coming into the world back in Britain, or England, sorry, and to you now in Australia, what have been some of the most formative moments for you that have brought structure into how you've approached working with wildlife?
To be quite honest, I wish I had worked more with wildlife. I have, when I was it was when I was at vet school, I went and did some volunteer type practical work in a zoo in San Antonio in the States. And they had breeding programs for wildlife there. They were breeding snow leopards and Gallardo baboons, who are some of my less favourite wildlife. So I did. That was a very good thing. I think if you want to work with wildlife, just get the experience in and go and volunteer with an organisation like that or with a zoo and get a bit of that hands-on contact and experience just to see what you do like, what you don't like, what species you're comfortable working with, what comes up. You have no idea when you go into a place like that what weird and wonderful things you're going to be treating. And it's a really big, good learning curve. It's time very well invested to either volunteer in the wilderness or to volunteer at a zoo before you even start down the path of this is, how I'm going to do it and what I'm going to do. Just go out and put the time in with the the hands-on contact, because it's interesting what you like and what you don't like and what species you tend to connect with and not connect with so much.
So volunteering, you're saying, is first you said knowing what you do like, what you don't like is important, and then volunteering is a way to figure that out.
I
Within
think so.
volunteering, and because structure is important, and figuring out what you do and don't like it is important. Is volunteering the main way? And if it is the main way and the best way that you think, is there a specific way to go about it that helps, that would make the experience more profitable?
It's actually very easy these days that if you get online, there's a vast number of volunteer organisations to get a little bit of a feel of what do I find interesting, what don't I find interesting. I mean, going to the local zoo if you're in a big city is probably a good first step because it's close and simple and doesn't require so much time. In terms of going overseas and volunteering, you do have to be very careful and have a really good look at the organisations. So there was one I looked at that I was very keen to do in Namibia, working with the desert elephants. I thought that sounds very cool and interesting. And I got put off a bit of it. I read one of the reviews, and one of the persons who did a review said, "Oh, we spent the first week building a wall, just being used as slave labour." And, he was obviously a bit disgruntled by it. And I thought, yeah, I don't really want to go and spend a week building walls. And to be quite honest, they can put the resources and the money into employing a local person to do that. It was building walls around water tanks and then putting a little side place where elephants could drink so they wouldn't destroy the locals' water. But I did talk to someone I just met on the volunteering organisation who had been there, and she said, yeah, they worked really hard the first week, but the second week they were just camped out under the stars in the desert with the elephants, and it was the most amazing experience. So everyone's different of what they're going to like. She was completely happy about having to build walls for a week because, you got the good experience after that.
It sounds like the focus was different too.
It was a bit different. I went with Wildlife ACT, they're called, in South Africa. They won the global award last year for, it's called volunteer tourism, what they're doing, but you learn an awful lot more with them. And I think that's why they won the award. You need to go somewhere where they're going to teach you a lot about how the animals operate, what they're doing, why they're doing it. They show you how to use the telemetry gear. So you do a lot of tracking animals around the bush with the telemetry
you
gear.
said a word just there. What did you tell us that word? I missed it.
That's okay. It's a telemetry, which is this weird wire contraption hold up in the above your head. And they've collared animals. So some of the work, like with the hyena darting, and we also darted a cheetah in daylight hours. So they try and get collars on the important animals that might help them find other animals to track them around the bush, because wildlife can be quite hard to find. You can spend an awful lot of time in Africa driving around the bush and mostly just seeing antelope. So the volunteer thing was very good in terms of you're actually tracking the really hard to see species around the bush. So they taught us how to use the telemetry gear to track the animals that have the collars on. And it's not that hard to do. It's quite interesting. You all take turns doing it. And you make pretty good friends with other people who have similar interests, which is really marvellously helpful, I think, in future life to have people who are on the same page as you. So I picked them. They were the first ones that came up, and they were the ones I went back to because the reviews were good and I could see the work they were doing was really good. Now, there are other people who may want, more to be raising orphans. And there's a lot of places in Africa where you can do work like that, in places where orphan animals are brought in. And there are probably people who prefer to do that. I want to raise these baby animals and get them ready to go to the wilderness. I was really interested in the logistics of saving species. And wildlife ACT is very much into, how are we going to save the last of these endangered species? How are we going to repopulate parts of Africa? And it was a massive learning experience for me. I've read a lot in this area, I've lived there, but I learned so much more by being around people actually working, doing that. You can read and read, but it just doesn't take place of actually turning up and talking to them and hearing their stories. And
Yes.
making the contact.
Don't just read, but also do. Can
Yeah.
I ask, Joe, what was, like, for yourself, what was one of the most impactful things that you took away from these experiences in Africa?
The volunteering. That there is a lot of work to be done there, but there is a lot of amazing work already being done there, and that there are a lot of opportunities to go and be involved. It's not as hard as you think. And once you get to wherever you've decided, your calling is, you meet the people who will become your little bit of a social backup group. Who do I talk to when I'm worrying about this, when I'm trying to, nut out a decision about that? It's just in the average world, you tend not to be around people with similar interests, and they look at you and zone out a little bit sometimes when you start talking about wilderness and wildlife. They're sort of interested, but they've got no common experience or even the common interest to read about it.
Yeah.
Doing those volunteer things starts to get you into that bit of an environment, even if it's a worldwide one and those people are all going to be distributed back to wherever they came from. It starts you into that network where you might decide or have more opportunity to go and do those jobs, do those volunteering opportunities. Even going to the zoo will start you off on a bit of a path like that. So a lot of the zoos have wildlife breeding programs. So really, it's not so hard once you start looking to find a way into the wildlife world and find a connection with people who help to keep you inspired and on that path to doing something closer to your heart rather than just getting sucked into the materialistic world and feel, oh, well, I'm stuck here. I have to do this job. I have to do this. I'm poor financially. And it's just a very sad way to live, to get locked into the greater materialistic world, because there's so much more going on in the universe, on the planet, than any of us can conceive of, really.
So a big thing for you was the community that you came
Yes.
part of. For
Yeah.
you, yes.
I think so. That's for me partly because, you feel like in the human jungles, you are living in a wilderness when it comes to like-minded people sometimes. So getting the connections that there are actually quite a lot of people on the same page out there, and you just have to be hooked up with them. And it's really nice to have that. It's sort of encouragement. It's encouragement and support, and it gives you all sorts of ideas you may never have had yourself.
I think this also kind of ties into a little bit of your foundational message that you're one of the reasons that you're writing these books as well. And a message that you want to give is that if for those that care about wildlife, don't be afraid to try and make a difference. Get involved and don't feel like you can't do anything.
Absolutely.
Is really what it sounds like everything ties down to.
It does really. I mean, that was my first book. It was, don't feel that, you're stranded, because even when you are, you just keep step by step working away at it and the outcome will be fine. And that's really what happens to the heroine in the first book. it's very much he's in a different wilderness, and it's very much, her personal progress as she comes to do what she thought she'd never be able to do.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, and I think maybe as we close this conversation down like a book, can I say it's been very interesting hearing some of your perspectives on volunteering and why people should do it, as well as a bit of your book, Joe. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Can I ask if someone wants to read your book, how can they find you?
I have a writing website, which is www.joesquirewrites.com. So it's Joe, Josquire, no E on the end of Joe, www.joesquirewrites.com. You can find my book, Black Ivory, which I have a little copy, on...
Yes, it's cool front cover.
It's a good cover, isn't it? On Amazon, you can find the startup book. Yeah. Yeah,
sweet. And I'll put all these details down in the show notes as well once this comes out. So if anyone wants to reach out to you, I'll put connection points as well as where to find the book down the bottom. And then the mobile vet service as well, the Cairns mobile vet service. If you need if someone needs you, those details again, I'll add them underneath if they're curious.
The mobile vet is distracting me from the writing and my project right at the moment.
Yes, it would be a big distraction, man. Being flown out, the things you see, getting to fly on a plane, I would think is awesome. To be able to just see it flying and seeing so much of North Queensland as well is quite spectacular, and you get paid to do it.
It wasn't. That was my attitude at the beginning. I don't care what they paid me. They're paying me something to fly around in little airplanes and go to remote places in the middle of nowhere. This is great.
Oh, it sounds like an absolute dream, Joe, an absolute blast. Again, if anyone wants to reach out to you, I'll put those details in the bottom. I think
Thank
that's
you.
really cool.
I very much appreciate that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Joe, for coming on the show. It's been a blast.
Thank you so much for having me. So appreciate it.
Thank you for watching or listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to find more information on today's guest or more information on the podcast, you can find those details in the description below. Otherwise, I hope and look forward to seeing you in the next one.